Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we've been to see In the Heights.
Yes.
You were excited about this one.
I was excited at the prospect because I saw it in London.
Okay.
It wasn't in the West End. There was this theatre behind King's Cross, which I now can't remember. And it had such incredible energy. You know, it was wonderful to see live. Though I did remember thinking at the time that, you know, it would have been an even bigger hit if it had more memorable tunes. Mm. Yeah, there was something about the beats and so on. You were enjoying it as you listened, and certainly the dancing and, you know, and so on. It was like kind of exciting, but it wasn't a top musical.
Yeah. I hadn't seen it before. I knew it was Lin-Manuel Miranda. Music and lyrics by Lin-Manuel Miranda. The musical's from 2005. And the book is by Quiara Alegría Hudes, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. She's Puerto Rican. In fact, they're both Puerto Rican. There's a big Puerto Rican influence in the film, but actually the main characters, the very central ones, are from the Dominican Republic.
Yes.
They live on this block in Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, which is next to Harlem. And the block is Latino. There's a variety of people from a variety of Latino backgrounds and a few others. There are first generation, second generation people there, all kind of mixed together. Your main character runs a bodega, which in the UK we know as a corner shop or a convenience store. There's no cat, which I'm led to believe is very common in bodegas, but there you go. Bodega cat. It's a thing. And although the film begins with him, it spreads out to this cast of characters. It's a real ensemble piece. Everyone has an interesting story to tell.
Yes.
I suppose... I mean, there were lots of things I liked about it, although I was basically cynical throughout.
Oh, I loved it.
Which is not... I mean, it's not that fair, really, is it? But that can't help it. That's what I was. I kind of thought, what is this going to do that... Yeah, has this done anything that surprised me, I thought? And the answer was no.
Oh, we see. I would disagree with that.
Yeah. Well, go on.
Well, I mean, there are other films about the immigrant experience. You know, there are other musicals. I mean, the obvious reference point, I think, is West Side Story. But I think this does things that the other films don't do, you know, which is it places all of these different experiences, some aspects of which are shared, you know, by all the community, in a political context, which is done very gently, but that is very much there. Yeah.
DACA is mentioned, which was under Obama. This thing about allowing undocumented immigrants to stay in America, and that was a very controversial thing during his time there.
I mean, you know, when you think of like some of the Brexit things, and like, so for example, my fears of, you know, being all of a sudden left without a job and a home, and, you know, if you think of somebody who's actually practically born in the country, I mean, he says he arrived with diapers, right? And growing up there and everything, and then not being able to go to school, you know, because he lacks documentation. I mean, it brings it into a completely different perspective. And it
is gently brought in, as you say, because actually the first inkling you get of that is when someone says to him, why do you think you're paid in cash for your work at the bodega? And then it's not addressed as to actually what it is. Later, when it's revealed he's undocumented, it becomes very, very clear.
The film can be read in many ways, but, you know, it has like these little slides, so it's not overtly a raw political film, but all of those oppressive elements of an immigrant experience, you know, particularly Latino people, and particularly of Latino people of color, are all in the film. They're just there, right? They're not necessarily highlighted for you, but they're there in a way that you don't see in other films. And of course, you know, this is a musical, so the whole utopian thing is there. But it's also kind of framed like in very interesting ways, right? So for example, you know, this film could have put the family at the focus, right? Which many other films do, right? But it doesn't, right? Like you do see, like, you know, these people create their own family with this abuela who doesn't have her own children, and, you know, and kind of people of different ages, and, you know, parents are drunks or irresponsible, yeah? I mean, you know, Jimmy Smith is a good one, yeah, and he's lovely in the part. But, you know, you also see Mark Antony, who's also wonderful in that part of the drunken drug addict. He's clearly been in jail from his tattoos, and so, I mean, just, you know, it evokes a lot. So I think it's interesting that these things are there, I think it's interesting that they're there in a utopian musical.
Let's say that spoilers will be coming up.
Yes.
I suppose when I say it didn't do anything that surprised me, I kind of expected it to be attempting to tell all these stories and represent all of these different aspects of immigrant life, and particularly Latino life in New York. You know, it's where the writers come from. It's very much of a place, and I suppose of a time as well. Well, there are certain things that you see as kind of stretching back to the experience of immigrants, no matter when. But there are some things that are more of recent relevance, I suppose. And that actually feels very unfair of me, right? Like, my basic expectation going in was it will be doing a load of stuff really well. So what's to praise about it? Do you know what I mean? So I appreciate that I'm not being very fair about that. Because actually those representations are interesting and well executed. And, I mean, there's a certain degree of use of stereotype in some of it. Like, I think particularly of the women who run the salon, you feel like I feel like they're a little bit thinly drawn.
Well, I like them. And the salon is a place because, you know, it's the one place where ethnic women or women of color can make a living and run a business and have, I mean, in a place with very restricted options. That is one. That's why it becomes such a cliche, right? Hairdressers and nail salons, right?
Yeah.
You know, kind of immigrant women of color don't get a chance to make a business anywhere else.
No, sure. But still, I think the characters were a little more thinly drawn than I would like to. I felt like I wanted a bit more from them.
They are being basically squeezed out of the neighborhood through gentrification. And that is a running theme in the film, right? When the old lady goes to have, you know, her embroidered napkins cleaned. And, you know, to clean embroidered napkins now costs $117 to clean 6.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, the guy who has bought half of Jimmy Smith's business, which he then wants to sell the other half to, or does sell the other half to. The thing about the music, my heart sank whenever the women opened their mouths. And let me finish that sentence, because I didn't like the fact they didn't get to rap. You know, so Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote Hamilton, right, which I like an awful lot, and we saw it together in London and had quite a good time. And I know a lot of the lyrics off by heart. I've listened to that a lot, and you know,
you love it.
Yeah, and the lyrics that he writes the rap lyrics that he writes are complex. There's a lot of internal rhyme. They're fun to listen to. They're very witty. He's very, very good at it. And the guys get lots of that in this, and the girls I don't think get any. I was listening for it as well. Like, maybe in the opening number, one girl gets a line or two, but the rest is melodic singing. Not only that, but the two main, I suppose, women who are... I can't remember the character names, but it's the girl who the main guy likes, and the girl who
wants to be a fashion designer,
and the girl who the other guy likes.
Yeah, who is going to business school in Stanford.
Yeah, and wants to come home because she doesn't feel she has a place there. They're basically these two kind of depressive messes. So they open their mouths, and then the first note is long and slow, and like the whole tone drops, and you're like, this woman's going to sing about how what a shit time she's having, and the rest of the musical is quite upbeat. So, you know, and I thought, to put all that on them, to make them the harbingers of depression, and then with these long, slow pieces, I really had a bad time whenever they started singing. I thought they were given a bit of a rum deal.
It's interesting because, you know, I was going to complain about the voices, right? Because I think musicals at the moment have to offer more. And some of the singing was very beautiful, yeah. I really love sometimes the sweet notes that the black guy and the boyfriend of the girl, who wants to go to Stanford, yeah. His voice was, I thought, was beautiful sometimes. Yeah, it had really sweet notes. But then I also thought that, you know, one of the things about classical musicals is that they can often bear people who can't sing, but there's a great variation in tone through the musical as a whole. Yeah, that there's kind of almost like an orchestration of voices. So you could have like several bad ones and just some competent ones, and then you'll have Frank Sinatra. Or Judy Garland, and they'll be added to the mix, and so you have this enormous variety and depth in that. Whereas actually, I thought in this musical, it had a very narrow band of voices. Yeah, that most people sang competently, none sang divinely, right?
Yeah, I agree. And the only real variation for me is the rapping. I think, especially with the main guy, who I recognise from his voice was the guy who played Lawrence in the original cast of Hamilton. Anthony Ramos, he plays Usnavi.
Yes.
Which is a joke that reminds me of a similar joke in Arrested Development from maybe a couple of years earlier. It's the first thing that was written on a boat that his dad saw when he came to America was US Navy. So he called his kid Usnavi. So he's Anthony Ramos is the guy who was Lawrence in Hamilton, and he's terrific, and he's got all the right kind of energy. Yeah. And as he did as Lawrence, Lawrence as the character was like up for it more than anyone and all that kind of stuff. He had a lot of fight in him. You see the same kind of thing in the guy here. And the guy with the wonderful voice
is Corey
Hawkins, who we remember from the start of Black Klansman, where he played Kwame Ture giving a speech. I really remember him from that. It was only he was in it for a scene, but really remember him from that. He made an impression. The main two women are Leslie Grace plays Nina, who is Corey Hawkins' love interest, I think. Uh-huh. She's the girl having trouble at Stanford.
Experiencing racism in Stanford, but also feeling guilty that her father is having to sell the family business, his whole life's work, in order for her to get a university education. Which to me is also an implicit critique of America. I mean, this is a place where kind of in order to get an education, you've got to sell your whole life.
Yeah, I mean, implicit is, putting it fairly. I mean, it's obvious. It's right there.
Well, I'm not sure that would be obvious to an American audience, which would take it for granted that if you don't have $60,000 a year extra, your kid doesn't go to, university.
Well, I see what you mean, but I mean
community college.
College tuition and loan debt is a problem in America, and it's a constant story. I mean, I hear about it over here. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of these stories that makes it across the Atlantic to here. As does same thing with healthcare. It's just the same thing basically. These things that are made unbelievably expensive.
Yes.
By simply the American system. That's freedom, right? Yeah. Your freedom to pay huge amounts of money. I just saw the other day that Joe Biden has apparently forgiven $3 billion in student loans. Good. And then I saw that the student loan debt is $1.5 trillion.
So drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the film, because initially I was actually very disappointed by the look. I thought, because I was wearing contact lenses in the theater because, you have to wear the mask. And I thought, are my contact lenses off? Because, the first 10 minutes of the film seemed almost out of focus, right? Which, I
think they were.
You think?
Well, here's the thing. I came into cinema just after you because I was getting popcorn, and I saw a guy leaving the screen to go and talk to someone, so I thought, there's a problem with the screening.
Yes.
And that was the only thing I could see that was an obvious problem.
It was the focus.
And then the rest of the time I was thinking, maybe this is just what the film looks like. Films do sometimes look like this. They do look a little bit fuzzy sometimes the way they're projected.
I was wondering that as well.
And then it got to the end credits and the names were out of focus, and I thought, no, it's natural. They're not showing it properly.
Yeah.
I think the film was shown slightly fuzzy. The other thing though actually was, this is another problem with the women's voices actually, is sometimes I felt they got lost in the mix to the point where I couldn't understand the lyrics. I don't think I caught lyrics. When the productions of the songs get quite big and there are a lot of voices involved and a lot of instruments involved, I thought voices, not just the women's, the men's as well, when they were singing, were getting completely lost in it, which was a problem. I wanted to understand the lyrics.
I didn't find that, though. What I did find was I wasn't sold on the choreography, right? Because I am one of those people, I just love watching dance. And actually, it brought back memories of, being at the cafe in the film school in Cuba. And, you have people from all over Latin America. And, I caught someone looking at me and I thought, he must think I'm a perv, right? Because, you're watching us, like these people dancing.
Yeah.
And it's just so amazing it's such a joy to watch, people who know dance, but in a very quotidian way. They're not dancers, right? They're they're just dancing on us on an evening, but it's such a pleasure to watch. And I thought the film lost sight of that actually just watching people dance well is a pleasure of its own. So it has people doing incredible things with their bodies. They're leaping and backflipping and doing incredible Vogue things with their arms where you think their arm socket's going to fall off. but at a really frenetic pace, and it's combined with the editing, and so you catch these glimmers of extraordinary things, but almost like too fast. Like the steps are too fast, and I felt they weren't showing me dance at a pace that I could appreciate, and also the choreography itself was too frenetic, really, which might work on stage where you want to build up that energy.
But the thing is, on stage you have no editing. On stage you can see everything. The whole thing is done in one take, effectively. And here it's not. And I agree with you. I kind of felt that. I mean, I did think, this is going to be something Jose brings up. We bring this up a lot. But I started to think, no, I will agree with him when he says this.
So you can predict what I'm going to say.
I agree with you. Like, there were elements of that design that I thought were quite interesting, if not impressive. I like early on, at the end of the first song, I think, when the main character, the bodega owner, is staring out the window, and in the reflection you see from the outside, you see this choreographed, all these dancers that you should be just seeing. But so it's like he's separated from them, he longs for them, something like this. It seems to represent something that he wishes for, it's combined with what he's singing about and the tone he's singing. So that's just quite interesting. And then he leaves the bodega and he goes dancing with them, and it's terrific. But I thought, what an interesting way of bringing them in, and what an interesting kind of image it creates.
It's got lots of lovely things. I love the whole number in the pool, with the Busby Berkeley choreography, and then there are things that I think are brilliant ideas, but they weren't executed well enough. So the scene where the young girl is walking through the big avenue, and all of a sudden it's like bolts of cloth or falling from buildings, right? And it's kind of like her dream is to be a designer. I thought there was something about the drop of the cloths that felt too amateurish. That, I don't know, you could have given it flair or sweep, or the way that it unfolded could have been poetic or expressive of her longing or her dream. Whereas, it was just like, it was almost like whatever visual equivalent of Photoshop is a digitized effect. It's a wonderful concept.
Well, that's it. The moment it came up, I thought, what a great idea.
Yes.
It was dazzling initially.
Yes.
And then it wasn't emphasised with the use of camera or anything like that.
So it's like the idea is wonderful, the execution isn't. The same, though I like that a lot more, when there's that rap with the boys walking down the street and you have the lightsabers and all that stuff being drawn in. So they do gestures and then they're drawn in. I thought that was great. I also think it could have been better, right? And the same with the dancing on the ledge, which was obviously inspired by a royal wedding where he dances around the room.
Oh, yeah, so they're on the fire escape, the black fella and his Stanford girlfriend.
Yes.
And then they turn 90 degrees and they're walking on the wall of their high-rise.
Yes. So it's Benny and Nina?
Nina, yeah.
So I think the director doesn't bring the requisite flair for capturing or for evoking those ideas, for expressing those ideas in a way that's kind of moving, both viscerally and emotionally. That kind of you take note of the idea and you say, like you said, it's a wonderful idea, but that's where it ends.
Yeah, exactly. It remains as an idea, and then the thing with the walking on the wall one was I was sort of going, is there more to this? What does it mean? So, I guess I thought, it's sort of saying we can make the world what we want it to, but it's quite banal. And I don't remember the lyrics really, but it didn't really seem to fit. I mean, isn't that the point where she's going back off to Stanford?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't understand what about making the sort of squalid, if you like, area of the Heights, why would that be part of that? She's leaving it. I don't know.
I mean, that whole character I didn't understand very well either, because if they're so clearly in love and if they love each other and if they both have ambitions to go to school, why doesn't she just transfer to NYU or Columbia? You're right. Like, I mean, there's I can't imagine that there's a degree that you can do at Stanford that you can't do in New York.
I don't know, maybe it's the best school, that's where you need to be. I mean, she got into it, I don't know.
Maybe, but
And then part of that is actually surviving the fight is kind of an important thing, although I'm not sure that's quite brought out by the script. And that could be part of it, you know. I mean, I thought it was a very moving scene where she goes to her dad and essentially apologises and says, I'll do it, and and he has that wonderful line, "This is the moment where you become better than me," which is terrific, and he delivers it so
Jimmy
well.
Smith's
It really moved me. And because that's the scene that there's real hope in that scene. So like, there's this thing about everyone has a dream in this film. Starts off with Bodega Guy. He has this dream to Usnavi. He has a dream to go back to the Dominican Republic and reopen his dad's bar, I think it was. That was it's all broken and decrepit, and he's been spending money, or rather saving money, but spending it to buy it back. And the whole thing is he's eventually going to go back there, and you know the dream turns, right? And
well, he realizes it's not his dream. That's the other thing, right? So the whole film begins about like little dreams that are important, right? And of course, you know, I mean, for me, it touched me in a different way because I am an immigrant child, you know. So these things kind of resonate within my own experience, right? Like your parents' dreams are not your own. Your parents' home is not your own. Right, like, you know, you might be someone of descended from the Dominican Republic, but actually you grew up in New York. So yeah, so this dream of return, which has a great pull, as we see in the film, it has a great pull for reasons other than your own psyche. Yeah, it's a pull of family, or a pull of culture, or a pull of music, or food, and we see all of those things in the film. Actually, the film is wonderful. I mean, the great care that is taken with the presentation of dishes, in that you know you have a party and they go to great trouble to show you the dishes, right? Because that is evocative of food and home and the motherland, or whatever you want to call it, the place of origin. So the film, in a way, is about that discovery. That so on the one hand, there's this with the Dominican Republic, and he's got a map and. Yeah, which I love seeing, actually, because I don't think I've ever seen that in a film before. And actually remind me to talk about it, because I think the reason why the film is not a hit has to do with a lot of this being involved in praise and, you know, of like all of the different Latin American countries. Yeah.
Sorry, what is it you feel you've not seen in a film before?
You know, when the film begins with a map of the Dominican Republic, right? And it's home, and, you know, he's talking to the children about this dream and, you know, kind of, you know, what a wonderful place to come from, and, you know, the sea and everything. And then there was that scene where it's the hottest day of the summer or whatever, and the nail salon people are leaving the neighborhood, or have been forced out of the neighborhood, and why isn't there anyone to give them a party? And they finally find, you know, people in the alleyway, and it is like a paean, or, you know, a song of pleasure in they're coming from elsewhere, right? Like, you know, so, you know, they Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Mexico, yeah. It's kind of like this whole community of Latinos kind of dancing away, and it is like the waving of the flags and so on. And I wonder, how is this going to go down in Middle America? Like, you know, they're waving every flag but the American one, which is very unusual, in a film. Actually, I think even in West Side Story, you know, the reason why you have the two rival gangs, and one is Puerto Rican and the other one is Polish. Right, like, so you have that whole Aryan, blonde, blue-eyed, element, so that Middle America finds an anchor into seeing them as the same, right? But this doesn't have any of that. It's all kind of, you know, Latino people of every shade, waving the flags of their place of origin, which they now stake in Washington Heights, right? So it's not this process of becoming American, which is very interesting. They are, or most of them are American. They just, you know, have origins in less recognized places. I thought that was both really wonderful for the film to do, but I couldn't help but thinking, this is why the film is not going to be a popular hit. How is this going to play, like in, you know,
well, you never know.
North Carolina?
I mean, you don't know, do you? Until
well, you're beginning to find out, because the film was expected to be a huge hit. It's gotten wonderful reviews, and actually it's been a disappointment at the box office.
This is from Wikipedia. While some analysts suggested that the film's underperformance could be partially blamed on its simultaneous release on HBO Max, Rebecca Rubin posited in Variety that it could be attributed to alternate factors such as the film's 143-minute runtime, reducing the number of individual screenings per day,
Yes.
25% of American theatres remaining closed at the time of release,
Well, that too.
and many theatres which had opened limiting audiences due to social distancing, and the film's source material and lead cast members having relatively low name recognition. None of which addresses them in the way that you have, but that's a possibility too.
No, because I'm kind of, I suppose, adding. I mean, I agree with all of that. Those are all possibilities. But I think there's also a possibility that in a white supremacist America, with Make America Great as a logo, this planting the flag of every Latin-speaking country that has a significant population in the U.S. and not assimilating it somehow into a U.S. flag is a problem, or will be a problem for people, for certain.
I mean, to be fair, even if they'd have to get that far into the film to notice there's no American flag. They wouldn't even go to see it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, but no, come on. I mean, there are things like word of mouth or whatever. So yeah. I mean, I'm just saying that's the kind of thing that I expect would play problematically, right? And we forget that similar things in previous films are always introduced/restricted by having to offer an Aryan white point of identification or introduction to the material.
I expected more singing on fire escapes.
There's quite a lot.
There was quite a lot, and I expected even more. Because, like I say, when I say, the film did it surprise me? It wasn't just doing things I expect. I think some of it was in that. Some of it was in the kind of... There's something about films about New York that are like just so fucking convinced that New York is great.
Yeah.
Right? And this film has that, right? Like, it's great. We make a great life for ourselves, and no matter what white supremacist America is, we sing and we dance and we have bodegas and we all this, that and the other. We sing in the salon. We have a great time. And I kind of imagine, like, what if you made the same film? What if you tried to make In the Heights about a corner shop run by an Asian family in, like Bordsley? You'd be going, like, basically the film would be going, no, Birmingham's a shithole. This life is shit. Do you know what I mean?
And actually that is also a problem in the film, right? So in West Side Story, you have Rita Moreno singing that song, I Want to Live in America, yeah, which is, like a critique as well, right? And the film has none of that, really. And it certainly has no sense of danger. Now, visually from what I could tell, it wasn't just set in Washington Heights. Like, you see the projects, right? Like, those buildings are the projects. And there's no sense of danger of...
Yeah, no, the store gets robbed once. And they just chase the guy
someone
down.
who's a client who steals an apple.
They just chase the guy down the street and it's a joke.
Yeah,
exactly.
The closest that the film intimates is the Mark Antony character, the father.
Yeah, that was a bit of a wild card moment.
That was a wild card moment because I also feel slightly cheated because, Mark Antony is actually wonderful in it. He's only there for like about a minute, but I think he's wonderful, really surprising. But I want Mark Antony to sing in a musical, right? Like, he's one of the great voices and one of the great figures of, Latin salsa and pop, and to have him in a musical. And not to have him, fucking Lin-Manuel Miranda gets to sing, he of like very little voice. And you have Mark Antony and you don't get him to sing? I mean...
Mind you, I'm glad that Lin-Manuel Miranda was in it for as little as he was, because the thing is, I do like Hamilton. I think it's very well written. I think it's an incredible concept for a musical. Like, who thought that a musical based on the guy who invented the US Treasury would be interesting, But... there's something about the guy, like he has, there's an ego to him, or just he's a little bit annoying.
He's a charming and charismatic figure, I find, in talk shows. But I don't like watching him perform on film. You know,
he wasn't great in Mary Poppins 2.
No.
Where he was playing the Dick Van Dyke role, basically. But he does restrict himself, because I think he was in the original cast. He was the main guy. He was Usnavi back in 2005 when this began off Broadway, or off Broadway. And he played it for a while, and now obviously he's too old to do that. So he's this guy selling frozen flavoured ice.
Why is he there at all, you ham? Give some young kid a chance to play that role.
I know, but it's the cameo thing,
You know.
isn't it? But I like the fact he is in it so little, because actually it means I can concentrate on the musical and,
Well, I
have a
wish you
better
weren't
time.
there at all.
Have a better time than I would otherwise. Well, so since you bring up your experience, I am interested in what your experience is, because you grew up in Montreal as an immigrant kid.
Yes.
So, which Montreal is not a million miles from New York.
No, it's in fact very close.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to know kind of what rings true and what doesn't necessarily about the film.
Well, many things are true. I mean, kind of there was a community for sure. The way that they describe, right? Like, both parents work and you're there to work and to save money, right? So kind of there's very little spent, and one relies on community. And it was also really multicultural. There were Italians and Portuguese and Brazilians and and Germans, in fact, and it was also the same way that in this film, they're one generation away from the from the Irish in the film. We were one generation away from the Jewish community, right? Like, you still had all the shops that were Jewish, right? Kind of, the smoked meat restaurants and the clothing shops and the middling supermarket, but which was the local supermarket. Those were all Jewish shops, right? So the neighbors that had made that community had moved to the suburbs or to a better neighborhood, but their businesses continued where they had made them, obviously, right? And that was also in the process of being gentrified, right? Like, I remember I lived in that same neighborhood, as an immigrant kid, and then also as a student, because by the time I became a student, the students were all kind of moving into that neighborhood, right? So all of those things resonate. The generational conflict, right? The kind of, I suppose, parents wanting to live their dream through you, and kind of the struggle over what you want and what they want. I mean, also to be fair, I grew up in one of the roughest neighborhoods, and we never felt that sense of danger either.
Okay.
Certainly as children, right? It did feel. I mean, I suppose we didn't know any better. Kind of. It was such a community feeling around it that you felt. You just didn't think of it really, but also you didn't venture more than a couple of blocks from your neighborhood, right? Then there was you did feel the danger, yeah?
Yeah, very much in this where we get the sense that the people from this block, this is where they stay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing about going to school and, the wonder of it, I mean, I think my dad went to work when he was 7. He went to herd sheep, so I think, he got, like, no education at all, practically, right? So this thing about, like, the significance of that, was a shared thing. And this kind of, I think the immigrant experience is a weird experience because there's almost like an exile of the mind and, a dream world that goes with it because, you leave the old country behind and, your parents have a longing for it, which they might transmit to a degree, but your existence is completely different, And their experience is one that is blunted by their own knowledge, right? So, kind of, I remember my parents, for example, we moved to Canada and every time they'd see a woman in a miniskirt, they were scandalized, right? People kissing in the street, scandalized. You didn't do that where we were from in Spain, right? But then, of course, the years go by and they think that the Spain that they left, it was the Spain, from the 1950s when they were young, right? And they don't see that Spain has also changed. Yeah, that there's also a 70s in Spain, and an 80s in Spain that would shock them even more, right? Like, So, I mean, actually, you don't see too much of that, but though, I think there are really shared immigrant experiences yeah, kind of no matter where people immigrate from. At least structurally there are, and I think the film touches on those very, very well. And I was kind of, moved by them, really. Like, it touched me. The film, it worked on me.
I think maybe one thing that I had an issue with, which I'm starting to figure out, and this again comes down to what do I mean when I say, did the film surprise me, is that those various aspects of immigrant experiences, such as experiencing racism at school, or the pressure of having to go to school because that's what your parents want, being undocumented, running a small business, being forced out of running a small business, your dream of making it, and so on. They are kind of compartmentalised in the film. Like, each character gets to represent one.
Sure.
And I think that's... I get it makes a certain amount of sense. I suppose it kind of keeps things simple, but it makes things feel simple. Doesn't make things feel as complex as they might to me.
Well, exactly. So, for example, I just didn't feel any sense of danger or threat in the protagonist, right? What is the block to their desire? They don't seem to really...
No, there isn't one. He's going there. He's paid off the thing and he's going.
So, whereas, the thing about West Side Story is there were real dangers. There was something really at stake, right? They left the old country because there was no food. They were hungry, right? And then there's knife fights and, trouble in high school of the different ethnic groups, right? That, there's a sense in which kind of there are dangers and there are fears and there are things to overcome. I think in this film, there doesn't seem to be...
I think it's interesting, actually, that becoming comfortable is kind of seen as a danger, actually. Like the idea that actually things are right. Because a lot of these people, it's set in the present day, right? So a lot of these people are second-generation immigrants. Their parents are immigrants, but they've grown up in the US, or they came to the US at a very, very young age. So they've effectively grown up in the US since they were 5 or 6 years old. And, there's that thing about the heat, right? Which I think the heat is... They do an abysmal job of actually communicating the heat. If you think about Do the Right Thing, right?
Yeah.
That's how you show how it gets hot in New York.
Yeah.
That's kind of how you communicate that feeling. But okay, never mind that. You accept the fact it's getting extremely hot this summer. And then there's that scene where everyone's sat outside. It's when the salon ladies are gearing up to leave and there's no one there. And they're all sat outside in this courtyard just lazing about. And she effectively says, like, I've never seen Latin people succumb to heat before. That's not what we do. And there is this kind of implicit thing in there about you've got comfortable being in America. There's a certain feeling to that like...
I can see that. I mean, I don't know. So I loved the film. I really loved watching it. I could see myself watching it again. But I also think it's not really quite good. Even though, the reviews have been fantastic. I think it doesn't have enough grit, enough cynicism, enough nous. The whole thing about, about being in a big city, and being in a poor neighborhood in a city is that you have to be smart about surviving it, right? You've got to be kind of sharp. Right, and kind of be aware of what's happening around you and be able to respond to things quickly and so on. And there's something like to Valley Girl or something about this film. It doesn't have that New York energy and wit and, of people who have to scramble a living where there isn't one. Right? So you have to, like Jimmy Smith saying, oh, well, I learned how to shine shoes and with the first nickel I got, I bought the shoe polish. Well, the film doesn't have a feeling, of that energy and wit and intelligence that you have to survive a place like that.
Yeah, you don't get that feeling of people having to scramble, and considering the fact they're mostly out all day dancing, you think they would have no money. And actually a lot of that it comes through dialogue. You have the thing with Jimmy Smith, as he just said, and there's also a thing with Abuela. Yes. Who talks about her mum buying the velvet gloves because her hands were ruined from...
and you have to maintain your dignity.
Exactly, right, and which is why the napkins are so important to her. Like, you have these beautiful things, and again, it's an interesting idea, and it's expressed well in a line of dialogue, but it's not really expressed in the film.
Yeah. You know who I'm thinking of when I think of like this New York energy? I think of James Cagney. Right, the way he is on film, yeah, that kind of smartness, yeah, and energy, and like, yeah, the speed,
kind of hyperactivity.
yeah, it's like, it could just, but he's always got a joke, and he's always got an angle, and he's willing to use his fist, yeah, that kind of combination, really, yeah, that you see in New York films in general. This is lacking in this film. Now, it might be because it's a different period and a different generation, but actually it's kind of describing the same milieu, it's like, yeah.
People are pussies these days. The main guy, who is a very likeable character, there's that scene where he goes clubbing and he's on this date with the girl who he obviously likes, and it's an odd scene because he basically, well, she says, you abandoned me, right? You let me go off dancing with all these other guys. And then you get the feeling like he really couldn't take any of them in a fight, even though he says he couldn't. I mean, it's an obvious joke. And actually, a lot of it, in that scene, I'm going, what's the attraction to this guy for her?
Well, because he's a hard worker and he's cute and he's good to his family. I see the attraction instantly.
He spends the entire scene proving that he's a bit of a waste of time in a club.
He doesn't know how to go about doing those things because he's too good. I liked him, and actually I thought it was a very difficult role to play. Let me tell you, right? Because it's it's the lead role, but I think it's also a nothing of a role. Yeah. So I mean, it might be great if you do it on stage and you get your musical numbers, but actually, if you're just thinking about a character that has depth and complexity and can show different sides and the role is one-dimensional, so it's very difficult to play, right? And I think it's also kind of very difficult to. This is going to sound wrong, but I was going to say to not make him look gay, to make him convincingly heterosexual, in this part, and I think he carries that off.
How do you mean?
Well, it's a nothing role. It's an old-fashioned role. He's just moony about this girl. He doesn't know how to talk to her, right? Like, he's got to get his kid brother to ask for the date or his cousin to ask for the date. I mean, really? Like, I don't believe any of it.
I didn't feel chemistry between him and the girl at all, really. And the whole kind of longing, it's there on paper, but I didn't really feel that either.
No, I did kind of feel it. I did feel it from him. I think she's not very good. I mean, I think she moves very well, and she's very beautiful, I think. And she's wonderful in the dancing bits, but she's not wonderful in the acting bits. But I think he is wonderful, and he's very charismatic, and he pulls off this part, which I think, is the lead in a big budget musical, but it's a nothing of a part. Yeah,
it is a disappointing role. Essentially, the narrator and someone who pines over a girl. There's not a lot going on in that role. But that's why I say it is one of many protagonists. It is a real ensemble piece, and actually, what's central about his role is that he tells the story for everyone. He narrates it.
Yeah, but he's also the central love interest. I mean, the central male protagonist.
Yeah, no, he is. But it's a little bit more kind of spread out than that.
Sure, it's got other things, right? It's got the nail salon owner gets a number. The abuela gets a number. There are many ensemble numbers, right? So
I know what you mean. Though he is the main role, and he is the main character. Thinking about abuela, I didn't know whether to be annoyed or not when they killed her off. Right, so it's on the blackout, first night of the blackout, and you subsequently find out due to the heat, and she's not been taking her medication. She passes away as she goes to bed, and the moment she lies down, I'm thinking, oh, they're going to kill her. Which, it's not been like obvious that it's coming, but then the moment happens to think, oh, they're not going to kill her, are they? Because, well, for one thing, she's extremely likeable as a character, but another, it feels like such an obvious thing to do to generate some sympathy or something.
Yes, it's a wonderful actress, and she gets a beautiful number, I think.
And I think there could have been more done with it kind of symbolically, right? Because the thing is, you're introduced to her as abuela, and then you're told, oh, she's not my real grandma, but she's everyone's grandma. She didn't have kids of her own, as you said. She adopted everyone on the whole block. She's raised us all. And one of the questions of the film is what makes the community a community. And when she dies, that could be called into question, right? Like, she's the one who holds us all together or something, and what's going to happen to the community. But it doesn't pay off symbolically. It's not done. Nothing's done with it in that sense, which made me feel like it's artistically wasted. Put it that way, her death.
Also, I think the film has too many, or the story has too many holes, right? Because the whole thing is about this tight-knit community. Everybody knows each other, and everybody's grown up with each other, and lovely. But gentrification is pushing them all out, right? So kind of, the neighborhood's too expensive for these poor people to live in now, right? So some of them are thinking of going back to the Dominican Republic, and some of them are thinking of moving to the Bronx, where they set up the same businesses, right? And then the end of the film is basically you stay in where you were in Washington Heights. It doesn't make sense, right? You're being pushed out. All your clients are being pushed out, right?
Yeah, like those pressures kind of cease to exist when you just decide that they're not there anymore.
Exactly, right?
It's like when Wile E. Coyote just chasing Roadrunner, and then he goes off the end of the cliff, and the only time that he falls is when he looks down. Like, they're just not looking down.
So, anyway, we've been making a lot of criticisms on it, and the fact is that I still love it. Yeah. So, I was kind of tapping my head, and I was really engaged with it. There were a couple of moments that really touched me. There were a couple of flourishes that I really appreciated, So they have this little montage of significant Latin figures. They show Rita Moreno and Celia Cruz and,
Frida Kahlo.
And Frida Kahlo.
She's the one I recognised. And then they add in Sonia Sotomayor at the end.
Yeah.
Which was a really nice touch. It's clearly an addition,
And you see, these are the things where I think they're wonderful ideas, and I was very happy to see them, but they don't quite cohere. Because my question is, what was Frida Kahlo doing there? I mean, to my knowledge, she wasn't an immigrant in the U.S. I mean, she's a Mexican artist, married to a great Mexican artist who lived most of her life in Mexico. Like, what's she doing with Celia Cruz? The revolution in Cuba forced her into exile in New York, and then she lived the next 40 years of her life in New York. She's an immigrant. Yeah, kind of Rita Moreno was Puerto Rican, and, she made a big impact in movies and television and Broadway. I get it, right? But how does Frida Kahlo come into that picture?
I think it might take seeing that scene again to actually figure out, because it doesn't just come up, he has something to say, which then brings up these, 7 key Latina figures, right? But I wonder, is it to do with their being immigrants, or is it there to do with just being the kind of Latina heroines?
Well,
I don't know.
I mean, it starts off with women who are heroines because they are Latina Americans,
Right.
So, whereas, Kahlo is Mexican, I think it has more to do with, say, okay, well, we've chosen one person from Puerto Rico, one person, from the Dominican Republic, and now we need a Mexican.
Well, I think we've chosen one person that I will recognise. And then the rest will be recognised by Latinos.
Yeah, because, Chita Rivera, Rita Moreno, Celia Cruz, and then Frida Kahlo?
Yeah, Eva Peron.
Yeah, exactly. Why not?
Yeah, Giselle Bundchen. Yeah.
So there's something about the film that is just not good enough, And so I think I have to ask myself, then why did you enjoy it so much, really? Because I did, And I think there was something about the rhythms of the music. I love the color palette, which is really colorful, but in a very pastel-y way. Yeah. Even though the music wasn't great, I love the Latin rhythms. I love the rap. I love the attempts of... I love the film's inventiveness. It is inventive. It's just not poetic with its inventiveness. Yeah, maybe I'm asking too much of it, So I liked it very much.
Do you think it's pandering to your Latino-ness? Well, I'm not asking that seriously. The thing is, isn't it wonderful to see these lives represented, and there should be no question of having to invite white characters to, kind of comment on all.
I think it's marvelous that the film does that. I'm just saying that might also be part of the reason why the film isn't as popular as was expected. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but who cares why it's popular? We're talking about why you like it.
Oh. No, I kind of, I am a European, really. I'm a Spanish Canadian, really. So I never thought of myself as Latino until you are interpolated that way
By other people.
Right? So, when you go to the US and you are picked out on the border as in stopped to be questioned for no reason other than you have the name you have, right? So at those moments you feel kind of the weight of the oppression against Latinos. But it is a different cultures than mine, but I just love them. I love the music and the culture and the dancing and the food, and I identify with a lot of it. So I do get a real joy out of seeing it and seeing it represented on film, and some of it for the first time. I mean, again, when we talk about this paean to the Dominican Republic, I've never seen that in an American film before. So and I liked seeing it.
You got like a contact high through being Spanish.
A little bit.
Like, you're close to it.
Though, I mean, kind of, let's get these things clear, because there's an incredible amount of racism in Spain against Latin Americans. Yeah, a lot of Spanish people would not in any way identify with Latin Americans.
Is that so?
Yes, that is so.
Is that a bit like how we don't like the Australians?
No, I mean, I think basically what happened in Spain is, I think in the 80s, people from all over Latin America emigrated there for work. The way that Spanish people of a previous generation emigrated to Canada for work. But it resulted in a lot of discrimination. And people see, I mean, there is also visible differences, kind of people speak differently and they behave differently and they sometimes look differently. So it kind of gives a racist culture a real target. Yeah.
Yeah. That does sound like why we don't like the Australians.
Anyway, I liked it very much.
I liked it quite a bit as well. Maybe more than I expected. But I did feel like I was kind of watching at a distance throughout most of it. That's just who I am. Doesn't matter, that's the way it goes.
I think there is something about the film. I don't think it's just you. So I think the film is appealing to me for reasons that have to do with me more than they have to do with the film's own achievements.
But there's still a lot in it to enjoy.
Yes, I still loved it. So I would recommend that you see it. And actually it was very nice to be in the cinema and to have other people around us for a change. I mean, there's been a few times where we've either been alone or just been maybe a couple of other people.
Yeah, so on previous podcasts recently, we did Spiral and Cruella. And, I referred to us talking to each other in the cinema, and I want you to know that we were alone.
Yes.
We do have etiquette, and we didn't do it in this film. In Cruella, we really were properly alone. I think in Spiral, there was someone sat about 25 seats away from us.
This wasn't crowded by any means, but, there must have been a good, 20 people or something. So a more reasonable audience for an early showing on a Sunday, which is when we saw it. So I was very glad to see people back at the movies and, to see this particular movie, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter. And the website with 301 podcasts now.
Not only the podcast, but the best British podcast on film, as voted by Film Stories.
Is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
I think you'll find we were actually podcast of the week.
Why are you always ruining my illusions? You're puncturing my dream.
Yeah, you're escuelo, whatever the word was.
Anyway.
What's the word? What's the name of his bar in the thing? Did he name it his dream?
Yeah, sueño is dream. Sueñecito. Small little dream.
Right, is that what it was?
Yeah.
There you go. I kill your esfuercito.
Yes. You stomp on it. You dance a tarantella on my dream.